Let's bring in Rosemary Kelanic, who is the director of the Middle East program at Defense Priorities, and she's also the author of Black Gold and Black Male Oil and Great Power Politics. Rosemary, always good to see you. Thank you so much for joining us again. So just in terms of this distinction that CENTCOM is being really clear about, this idea that its job is not to escort vessels, but rather to guide them. What does that mean? And also, how risky, again, is this of a sort of venture for the United States?
Yeah, so I see this all as an attempt by the Trump administration to try to break Iran's blockade of the Strait of Hormuz, their closure of it, by trying to get more ships to go through the strait. But the United States is being very careful about sending its own ships through in any kind of escort capacity. Because US destroyers, we do have reports that they transited the strait by themselves to get into the Persian Gulf to help to help guide these merchant ships out. But the US military is trying to avoid getting into an escort situation because they understand that that will put big fat targets on their destroyers, which would have to move very slowly along with these merchant ships if they were to accompany them. So it's a mixed message here, right? Washington's trying to say, look, we got some US flagged ships out, so it's safer than you think it's been. But the US military themselves are not willing to go alongside those vessels. So that sort of undercuts the safety promise that's they're trying to make here.
So what happens if a vessel that is being guided out by the Americans ends up being attacked? What does the US do then?
That's a great question. The U.S. would try to defend it with missile defense, which they can do from a standoff position, potentially. They would probably try to find where those missiles, depending on what it was, right? If it's a missile that's launched or, a small ship or a drone, right? They try to figure out where it launched from and destroy the site, that it came from. But there's not very much that the U.S. can do to really make sure that nothing is attacked. So, we'll see what happens when that gets there, when we get to that point. And I also just wanted to mention, too, these vessels that went through, they're U.S. flagged merchant vessels, but they have a close tie to the U.S. military. They're part of the U.S. Maritime Security Program or the Tanker Security Program, which means that they serve in a capacity where if there's an emergency situation, the military can essentially press them into service and use them as military vessels. So these aren't just sort of random merchant vessels. They're ones closely tied to the US military that were not evacuated prior to Trump striking Iran.
That is an important distinction. And what has it been like for seafarers who have been stranded, stuck on these cargo ships, on these oil tankers since basically February 28th? What has that been like for them?
Well, it's been a nightmare for them. It's been a nightmare for them. They didn't expect any of this to happen. There's different reporting on what the conditions are on ships for these mariners, but they have limited food. They have bad conditions. They're stuck at sea much longer than they were supposed to be. And there's just huge uncertainty about when and under what circumstances they'll be allowed to go home. But these crews and their captains, they don't want to run the personal risk of going through the Strait of Hormuz. And that's the big impediment to traffic going through, right? Iran can threaten to attack, and that makes shippers not want to go through the strait. And the big question is, will this latest transit with these two U.S. merchant flagged vessels, will that make the difference in the considerations of these mariners? And it's not clear yet whether it will.
Yeah, that's a big point. Just the fact that, they don't feel safe, even if the US does promise to quote unquote guide these vessels through, that's still not enough of a guarantee. Just in terms of what the US's goal here is, just, Operation or Project Freedom, with guiding these other vessels through the strait, is the goal deterrence, to actually just sort of make sure that the Iranians are deterred from issuing any kind of attack? Or is the goal to actually engage Iran with force?
It's a good question. We don't really know sort of there's been some speculation that there's an ulterior motive here, right? That the ulterior motive is try to get ships moving through, and then if Iran attacks them, that's an excuse to resume hostilities with Iran. I don't actually think that that's likely because the president could resume hostilities with Iran anytime he wants to. So I don't find that argument particularly compelling. I think what they're trying to do is to try to, suggest that transit through the strait, even if Iran potentially fires, is safer than merchant ships think it is. And so I think they're trying to make the case that, like, look, you can actually come through. Chances are you won't be fired upon, or if you are, it's not going to sink your ship. And it's not as big a threat as it seems. That's what I think they're trying to convey.
I see. Right. Well, it remains to be seen, as you point out, whether or not some of the vessels that have been stranded are willing to take the risk, given the US's assurances. We shall see. Rosemary Kelanic, live for us there. Thank you so much.